Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna do a Q&A session. It feels like we didn't do one of these things in forever. So today I will be answering a few of the questions you guys left in the comment section of my videos. So with that said, let's get to work. Butternutty is saying that in UK right now, temperatures are around 17 degrees Celsius and fall between 7 and 9 degrees Celsius. And last week they got a new spike forming under the second leaf of a Phalaenopsis. This seems to be the wrong time of the year, doesn't it? Well, it sure seems that way, but orchids don't actually work according to the calendar. What influences blooming is actually temperature. So I do have a pretty extensive video on the subject, and what I believe, in my experience, is the main trigger for Phalaenopsis spikes, and it just happens to be temperature. So check the video down below, I elaborate a lot, but I'm not surprised, to be fully honest with you. This is how you can find Phalaenopsis orchids available in shops all year round. If you trigger them through temperature, which can be adjusted at any time of the year, and you have an available space for a flower spike, then the Phalaenopsis will bloom. As I discussed in that video, in my experience, it has nothing to do with daylight, intensity of the sun, how many hours per day the sun is available, and so on and so forth. It just has to do with temperature. And I've had the experience of growing Phalaenopsis orchids in 2 different environments. So yeah, check that video out. I don't find it to be strange. If the orchid was exposed to lower nighttime temperatures, then it's absolutely normal for it to send out another flower spike. Andreina is saying she has some issues with her Macotis petola. The leaves appear to be shrinking. I'm guessing you mean the new leaves. They're tinier than the old ones. Do I water it through the leaves or just the moss? Can I make a video with these orchids? I actually made a video about a month ago, an update, and they were all looking so pretty, and now look at it. This is the effect of not watering, actually. I told you about it in yesterday's video. I slacked a lot with watering. I just watered this orchid, and all of these dry patches are the effect of not watering. Also, this orchid is producing tinier leaves than it should. This is an effect of stress. So whenever an orchid produces tinier pseudobulbs or tinier leaves or tinier fans, depending what type of orchid it is, it's usually an indication of a sort of stress. In my case, not watering. This orchid hated not being watered, and I'm gonna work on recovering it now. But the stress can also mean that the orchid is adjusting to a new environment, or that it doesn't really have roots, and this was actually a cutting, it didn't have roots, or that you don't water it enough, or that it receives too much light or too little light, or things of the sort. So tinier leaves mean stress. What type of stress? You need to figure it out. One thing I will point out is that it really hates to be dry, so make sure that your orchid is always constantly damp. I don't water the leaves or the crown or anything of the sorts, I just water the moss. The important thing is to actually water it. So what you are experiencing with yours might be normal. If it's just a cutting, if it didn't have roots, it's absolutely to be expected. All orchids will be set back in a way or another. If it's not a division, if you have roots, make sure that you water it in time, make sure the light and the temperature are okay, and things of the sorts. But I'm guessing mine looks a lot worse than yours, and I still think this one is recoverable. The important thing is to find the source of the stress. Jody has a question about her Phalaenopsis orchid. She's saying that the new leaf is a bit more pale in color at the base than the rest of the leaf. Is that normal? Could it be because she didn't properly fertilize it for several months? Could it even be crown rot? So first of all, I do have a recovering Phalaenopsis here as well. And as you can see in the center, the color is a little bit lighter. So to some extent, this is pretty normal. But if you have a big difference between the base of the leaf and the rest of the leaf, it might actually mean something. It doesn't always mean crown rot or things of the sort, so don't worry about that. It could be a slight deficiency, absolutely. If your orchid has roots, you can actually start to fertilize it. Start with half the recommended dosage and then work your way up, just so we make sure that we don't destroy the root system. But yeah, absolutely, you can fertilize if the orchid has roots. There is a chance of something happening with the crown as well, yes, but in those cases, you would see a very big difference between the base and the rest of the plant. And you can see in my example here, I do have a difference, but it's not crown rot. It is normal for the fresher tissue to be lighter in color. You just don't want yellowness or very pale green. So tend for the orchid like you did until now, and yes, you can start to fertilize if the orchid has roots. Start with half the dosage, and I think everything should be okay. A viewer is asking about a Lepanthus. I don't have that orchid, but I do want to address this question. They were saying that they always see this orchid wall mounted. Is that something that is generally recommended? Well, I can see for vivariums how it's easier to keep the orchids mounted. It's even better because in a vivarium, supposedly you have a lot of humidity, so you don't necessarily need to pot the orchid to keep it hydrated. You can just mount it, and because of the humidity, the orchid theoretically should be just fine. So overall, I think it is more practical for a vivarium to have mounted orchids, whether on cork or a decoration piece or a wood or whatever. I don't have vivariums. So it's not that it's recommended necessarily, but it is an easier practice, I believe. Now, orchids can actually be mounted on wood or cork or any other things, even if you don't grow them in a vivarium. The problem comes when you don't have enough humidity or you don't have enough time to water them. So, because I do get this question a lot, I will share with you down below my final thoughts, let's say, on owning mounted orchids. I had them for a year or two, and I had enough. In my apartment conditions, it is rather difficult to maintain them happy with the hydration. I need to water them every day, sometimes in the summertime, multiple times a day. I don't have the time to do that, and I don't have an automated system. So in an apartment, in your home, you can absolutely grow orchids mounted, but it's gonna take a lot of maintenance. In a vivarium, where humidity is kept a lot easier under control, you can absolutely mount them. It might actually be better if the humidity is really, really high. You can avoid some root rot, but in the end, it only boils down to humidity and watering. You can grow the same exact orchid mounted or potted, and it will grow just as well if conditions are just right for it in the particular environment that you grow it in. Tanya is asking if in my climate I'm not using self-watering when I use bark medium. Just checking. No, I don't use self-watering when I have mainly bark mixes. There are a few reasons, and the most important of all, bark is not absorbent. So bark will stay in a pool of water and it will just be wet at the bottom and dry at the top. Hence that advice that says orchids don't like to have wet feet. It's because of the layering, which bark is really prone to, and all the complications that can arise from that, which I shall not get into. It's very complicated. So no, with the pots that have mainly bark, I cannot use self-watering because it simply doesn't work. You need to have a more wicking medium, such as peat moss for other houseplants or sphagnum moss or something that will wick up the water from the reservoir. Even LECA to some extent can work, not as great as moss. You can actually make a mixture between bark and sphagnum moss, which can be wicking, and that will work theoretically with self-watering, but practically bark decomposes. In my experience, sometimes even faster than sphagnum moss if you have a very, very good brand of sphagnum moss. So even with the mixes, I would not use self-watering. I would just use straight sphagnum moss. It's easier to remove from the roots as well. So with self-watering, I tend to only use stuff that are wicking. Bark is not that wicking. It's actually even less wicking than LECA. Diane is asking, is it true that the dead roots will affect the media and then also the orchid as well and make it rot? Absolutely. It's actually a chain reaction, which I shall try to illustrate right now. So you know how roots have a coating which we call velamen, and inside that velamen, the actual string, the actual root? Well, the point of the velamen is to absorb and retain the water around the roots for longer. Now, when the roots die, that velamen will still be absorbent and will still be full of water. The problem is when the root is dead, there's nothing there to absorb the water in the velamen. So what it does is it just remains wet. And not only that, it keeps the medium around it wet as well. It's like you would have a bunch of sponges inside your medium. But unlike sponges, these velamen debris are organic and they will start to decompose really, really fast. And you might think, well, hold up, we put sphagnum moss, we put all sorts of stuff to maintain the medium more moist, right? So a bunch of velamen will only help. Not really. As I was saying, the velamen will start to decompose, and not only will it maintain a very wet environment here, which is beneficial for fungi and bacteria and decomposition microbes, it will also act as a playground and a feeding ground for decomposition microbes. And they will not only stay in that debris, they will start to affect the medium around it. They will have the perfect conditions to do so. moist environment, organic materials around them. It's an all-inclusive 5-star hotel. So because of this colony thriving there, your medium will actually decompose a lot faster. With decomposition of media comes degradation of its structures. The bark will not be a hard material anymore, which will have air pockets. It will become a mushy material, which in turn will suffocate the roots. And not only that, it will become very, very acidic. Acidity is one of the byproducts of decomposition. So the good roots will start to become suffocated and acidified to the extreme, and they will absolutely not like that, and they will start to die off, and there will be even more velamen there to get decomposed and accelerate the pace even more, and in the end you will be left with a rootless orchid, a very stinky medium, and pretty much a bad time. So especially with organic medium, it is important to cut away all of the dead roots, or as many as we possibly can. With inorganic, maybe not so important, but it's never a good idea to have debris which will become acidic and affect the good roots as well. So yes, it is an indirect process, it is a chain reaction, but in the end the result is root rot pretty much, and a very, very bad looking medium. Another viewer is asking that when they purchase orchids in near bloom stage and place them in their house, they get bloom blast or maybe bud blast as well. All buds dry out and fall off. What should I do? Well, to some extent, it might actually be normal. I will share with you down below in the description a video about bud blast. I elaborate there more on bud blast and what causes it. But to some extent, you can have bud blast whenever you change the environment of the orchid drastically. So if you purchase the orchid from a certain, let's say, nursery environment, which differs a lot from your home environment, maybe it's more humid there than in your house, then the buds have a great chance to fall. Flowers are more resilient than buds, but even flowers can fall due to severe environmental change. You could also have some things in your house that can affect the blooms and the buds, so do check the video down below because I do talk about all of the things that I know of which can cause bud blast and flower blast. So check them down below. I hope there is something in your house, maybe an AC, maybe a sort of hot draft or something of the sorts that makes them fall. Other than that, it might just be a it could actually just be a sudden change in environment. Robert is saying his Phalaenopsis has leaves that have curled, so they are now completely upside down. Most of them are right side up, however, the two in question have curled from the base of the leaves, twisting the whole thing over. Well, I have seen this behavior a lot with Phalaenopsis when you're trying to change the position in regards to the source of light. Phalaenopsis orchids, and not only, tend to head towards the light when they grow. I'm showing you a Paphiopedilum here with something similar. If you recently changed the position of your orchid, that might be the case. So let's presume that here where the camera is your window or source of light. If you do this business, then you'll get twisted leaves because they will try in a way or another to reposition themselves towards the light source. The more you change the position of your orchid in regards to the light source, the more twisted they can actually become. However, if you maintain the same position relative to the light source, all of the leaves will face in the same direction. Now, Phalaenopsis orchids naturally do not grow upwards, especially when they are positioned in front of a window. They will lean over the pot, and that's absolutely normal because in their natural habitat they grow on trees and their position is something like this. So no, they will not grow upwards. What you're experiencing might actually be normal. It might be their attempt to actually lean over the pot, but if you did change the position of the orchid in regards to the light, I think that's the cause, and the best thing to do right now is to just leave the orchid in a position and not move it around way too much. You can move it slightly, of course, if you take it to water it at the sink and you don't necessarily put it exactly how it was, that's fine, but don't do something like this. This usually creates all that weird twisting of the leaves. That's my best guess. I'm hoping it's not a deficiency, which could be. I'm hoping it's not a, let's say, deformed leaf. Sometimes it happens that one side of the leaf will be shorter than the other, or it will grow slower than the other, like in this case, and that will determine a curling. That can happen as well, but most likely it's the light source. Alrighty then, so that's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something new, and you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you want to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. With that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!